Superclaims presents A Day in the Life of Ruth Justine, Part 2. The Society of Superpowered Individuals certainly knew how to make a first impression. The gilded doors of their Los Angeles office and museum served as both an homage to their heroes and a warning to those who would challenge their authority. Luckily for Ruth, she was an associate with grievances, so she hoped her visit was treated somewhat neutrally, though that did little to untangle the knot in her stomach, or the overwhelming urge to walk any direction but forward. She'd expected this. To say Ruth, a veteran Morden insurance representative, was prepared would be an understatement. She was currently representing Suzanne Harris, better known as the superhero Sweet Rose, and together they had worked at length to refine the charges and grievances Ruth was bringing forward today. The society had failed to properly vet and prepare her client and Rodeo King regarding the abilities of Chiller, a villain who had the ability to generate a short-range pocket of ultra-cold air, as well as an allergy to roses, resulting in injuries and unsafe working conditions. Though Sweet Rose's own role was minimal enough that Ruth had trouble recommending confronting the SSPI, the hero nonetheless wanted to pursue charges, and Ruth would support her every step of the way. After all, they were more than insurance. They were Suzanne's insurance. Not that this was Sweet Rose's case alone. Ruth had spent a considerable amount of time researching past cases, as well as seeking Rodeo King's approval to confront the SSPI on his behalf, which he had given with a great deal of trepidation. Admittedly, the outcomes of past attempts to confront the society had not been promising, but Ruth tried to put all this out of mind. She began admiring the decor of the SSPI's Grand Museum. Shortly after the mask crisis of the 80s, the Society famously decreed the age of villainy over with the unveiling of this museum, dedicated to the heroes of the past 60 years. Ever since that day, it had been both a tourist trap and a magnet for petty criminals looking to make a name for themselves. A depiction of the gentleman shouldering the world greeted all who entered. The platinum statue's plaque was etched with the motto of the SSPI, "Your security in our hands." Despite herself, it was difficult not to feel a certain sense of awe in the museum's lobby. Depictions of the greatest heroes of history soared overhead, but she noted that none of them ever appeared quite this big or confident sitting opposite her in the office. Ruth approached the front desk, currently being worked by a pleasant young woman in a blue and gray outfit, the SSPI's colors. Ruth noticed the woman's smile wilt for a brief moment as she read Ruth's name tag. "Welcome to the Society of Superpowered Individuals Hall of Heroes. May I presume you're here for business?" Ruth nodded and said, "I'm meeting Wilfred Dixon." The woman, Lindsay from her name tag, dropped her smile and took on a more professional tone, bordering on defensive. "Ah, you must be Miss Justine. Please, follow me. I'll show you to Mr. Dixon's offices." Ruth followed, allowing for the familiar silence of professional courtesy to ensue. The two walked through a back hallway, the excess and idolatry giving way to function in the back halls. There were posters reminding society officers to double-check all hero identification or offering tips for handling visitors. It was somewhat comforting to know that the SSPI wasn't all former military and government officials. There had to be museum personnel, after all. Despite being a guest, Ruth couldn't help but feel the eyes of off-duty heroes on her. It was common enough for the SSPI to offer heroes work between assignments, and Ruth watched a janitor use his laser vision to clear away an inconvenient stain. She recognized him, an A-rank hero that she'd seen in a few publicity videos for the Society. He met her gaze, possibly calculating if she was a threat or not. After a minute of traversing winding gray halls, they arrived at an elevator bank. Lindsay swiped her keycard, and Ruth was given her first impression of how large this complex truly was. The museum had 3 floors, but there were 25 basement levels. It's reinforced with experimental metal, and it keeps the important assets safer if they're subterranean, Lindsay explained. hitting the button labeled B22 on the panel. No, we do not have windows. Yes, we do house a number of heroes with vulnerabilities to sunlight. Yes, we do have stairs to comply with basic safety requirements. Any questions I haven't heard 30 times over, insurance agent? Lindsay's delivery of these statements was robotic and practiced, and Ruth couldn't help but give a slight smile. She liked this woman's attitude. The agent thought for a moment, then asked, "Do people on these floors get envious of surface workers?" Lindsay shook her head. "I doubt it. If anything, we're envious of them. No obligation to deal with the public. No offense." Ruth bristled at being called a member of the public, but she chose to shift the conversation. "Of course. So regarding Mr. Dixon, ding." Her statement was cut off by the opening of the elevator doors, revealing yellowed and faded halls, lit by the ambient glow of fluorescent light in the quietly buzzing corridor. "You'll find him on the right, office 22-83. Look for the door sign. A pleasure meeting you, Miss Julie." Before Ruth could correct her, the doors were already closed. Faded gray carpet softened her shoes, unfortunately meaning that the only sound was the ever-present hum of dying bulbs and the rustling of her clothes. She checked the first door she came across, 22-01. Ruth sighed and began her search. Somewhere between 5 minutes and what felt like 4 hours later, Ruth hoped she was standing at the right office. The numbers long having fallen off and nameplate faded enough to either read Mr. Dixon or Mr. Dacombe, she knocked on the door. A gruff voice shouted, "What's it now?" Taken aback, Ruth responded, "Ruth Justine, we scheduled a meeting last week." She heard muttered cursing and heavy footsteps before hearing the bolt of a lock sliding out of place. "Should have figured you'd bother showing. Come on in, door's open." Opening the door, Ruth gained a new appreciation for her office. The already cramped room was filled by Dixon's cheap desk and 2 chairs, with an overhead light struggling to light the space's dull yellow walls. Every wall Ruth looked at had some sort of memento or personal token on it, newspaper clips and family photos providing constant distractions from the overweight man before her. Wilfred Dixon was a striking man, looming over his desk from his chair. He was tall, but despite his aggressive posturing and slouch, Ruth couldn't help but focus on his girth. The man had the appearance of never seeing a stair he liked, and she suspected much of this had to do with the fact that he was currently hovering a few inches over his chair. It was sensible enough that a psychic would have little reason to maintain their body, but Ruth wondered if Dixon's ability to levitate his own massive weight was a sign of strong psychic potential. "Sure is. You got a quick mind. That'll make this easier." Wilfred muttered this as he slid into his chair, various grunts of effort coming from him as he found a comfortable spot. Ruth was taken aback for a moment, composing herself and relying on her training with modern insurance. If her thoughts would be read anyway, there was no reason to rely on anything but instinct in the conversation. "A pleasure, Mr. Dixon. You'll forgive my lack of thought moderation. Records on you are scarce." The psychic grunted back, somewhere between a sneer and a laugh. "Don't wear that pretty hat off. Society's got strict rules on what I am and ain't allowed to do." "Ruth Justine, you're a hard woman to research too. Though I get the feeling that's just a result of a lack of ambition." Wilfred dropped a heavy tome on the desk, and for a moment Ruth was afraid it'd collapse. The book flipped itself open to a specific page, one she'd made herself well aware of. Article 35, Section 2A, Obligations to Partnered Heroes. "Yeah, I figured you knew this one. Since you're sitting here instead of dropping the case, I'll explain it to you real slow-like, to make sure you got it. See, Sweet Rose and Rodeo King are B-rank heroes, and all they're obligated to is knowing the when and where, along with whatever info's necessary for them if we have it." Another file hovered over, flipping itself to the relevant section. A case file on the villain Chiller. As you can see, this file's dated on the date and hour of Rodeo King's assignment. Chiller was a new one to us. All we had was a name and a guess. Now, Miss Rose says we didn't do our work, but there's no prior record of this fuck. Yep, hit her nerve. Apologies. I'll watch the language. Ruth nodded absently. "Yes, that is Sweet Rose's argument. Chiller the villain was unprecedented, this much is true, but Robert Darner, A-rank power wielder, had been documented and noted as a potential threat weeks before that incident. Ruth produced her own file, slightly annoyed at the delay she had in finding the proper page to display before placing it in front of Wilford. Dixon muttered as he read through the file. Don't feel bad. It's a hell of a lot of practice to get that trick down, Esper or not. Figures Patriot's rat pack tracked down his identity quicker than we could. Must have had a lot of money to throw around, what with being a CEO of your little insurance racket. Ruth bristled at this casual mention of Morton's founder, and she wondered if he had no reverence at all. She replied with what felt like a canned response. Please refrain from speaking of Morton's founder or the identification team in such an unprofessional tone. Wilford stopped reading for a moment, eyeing her. After a moment, he shook his head. Damn shame. You're too damn smart to be falling for their brainwashing. That's another conversation, though. Let's deal with your little case. It goes a lot easier if you let me take a peek at your thoughts, but you Morton types like to drag things out. So, you're claiming that Darner's profile not being matched up with Chiller is where we screwed the pooch for Sweet Rose and Rodeo King? Wilford had sat straight up during his retort, bringing himself to his full heights. Ruth found it less imposing, in a way, as though she'd transformed from a nuisance to a problem. She relaxed her posture with a nod. You seem to quite enjoy quoting rules. I'll offer one that I found of interest. Per the agreement between Morton Insurance and the Society of Superpowered Individuals, if a villain's identity is not identified within a 5-minute period of the threat being recognized, Morton Insurance is to be contacted to assist with identification efforts. Article 6, Section 3, 4th paragraph. You seem real proud of that one. Numbers bright as day in your mind. It's an interesting interpretation of that section. I'll give you that. Shame if you read a bit earlier on, it's referring to a defunct department. Patriot dissolved the SSPI Assistance Department years ago. And it ain't like there's time to wait on hold with one of your agents while a hero's on the way. It's a moot point, but you ain't gonna take this to court? Ruth saw a stack of legal books begin to shudder as Dixon said this. She grinned and said, Don't worry about digging out the old law books, Mr. Dixon. I suspect we can resolve this issue without needing to waste either of our company's time and money. As Sweet Rose's concerns are with publicity and internal affairs, not legality. Ruth brought to mind her client's desired outcome and the means by which to do it. Dixon sat for a moment, his arms crossed and eyes closed in thought. Finally he spoke. Well, ain't that a clever idea? Real win-win for the heroes. All I gotta do is throw my damn organization under the bus. Issue an internal apology to Rodeo King, pay for damages to the trail and sidewalks publicly, and just leave Sweet Rose out of everything. Seems peachy the way you think about it. He rolled his shoulders, staring Ruth down as he continued. Sorry about the pun, but you got rose-colored glasses on if you think it's that easy. Ruth kept an easy stare on Wilford, leaning an arm on his desk. Mr. Dixon, you and I both know that is the fastest and cheapest way forward for us both. Honestly, I doubt the society is too concerned about its pride, and something heavy slammed on the desk, a law book that was mid-flight. To Ruth's surprise, Mr. Dixon's relaxed face had soured. So that's your game. The society's got no balls, so we'll roll over on Morton's command? You insurance types are all the same. You forget who's holding the leash when push comes to shove. They're our damn heroes, and you let the mask slip for a second. Wilford rose from his seat, eyes flashing crimson at the edges. Ruth rose as well, cursing herself for slipping into the SSPI officer's pace. I meant no such thing, Mr. Dixon. Of course the society has a rich history as partner of Morton Insurance and superheroes, but you're a stray page whipped past her head. Wilford's books started to tear themselves apart. But nothing. Your precious money and prestige aren't worth a damn thing in our walls. Always with you Morton types. You waltz in and call the shots every time you got anything to lose. What, one of the shop's chiller smashed up decided you gotta foot the bill because your last hack repairman's work fell apart? I bet if I took a peek, I know. Screw it. It's worth the paperwork. Wilford's eyes seared into Ruth's mind. and she felt an intense burning. Memories flipped past, and she felt herself levitated roughly by the head. Instinctively, she reached into her pocket, pulling out a pen and jabbing it into Wilfred's side, drawing blood. With a grunt, he dropped her, falling onto his chair as his thoughts were interrupted. Silence settled into the office, papers fluttering as the two caught their breath. Ruth noticed one of the newspaper clippings had fallen onto her chair. A community outreach piece from Wilfred's early days, charitable work at a soup kitchen. Evidently, he'd broken some sort of record for most people served at once. She composed herself and handed him the clipping. Without a word, Mr. Dixon levitated the article back to its place on the wall, the books piecing themselves together as he composed himself. Sorry, Ruth. I've, got a real... Anyway, I saw your heart's in the right... Ruth interjected before he could change the topic. No. Mr. Wilfred Dixon, that was wildly unprofessional behavior. And in addition to the other actions I'm seeking, I'll also be demanding a proper apology and emotional damages repaid. We'll settle the details on my own time, but this is my client's time. Will you agree to my proposed course of action, yes or no? Wilfred refused to meet Ruth's eyes as he said, Yeah, your heroes will get their due. I saw plain as day the same for you or Morton. I'm sorry for... Ruth didn't hear the remainder of his statement, letting the door swing closed behind her as she rose and left the dingy office. The sound of ragged breathing was Ruth's only companion as she strode back to the elevator. As she strolled, she heard something crack in her hand. Black ink dripped from her pen, intermixing with Dixon's blood and staining her hand. She considered hurling the pen down the hallway, but fished out a manila envelope instead. Ruth figured she might need that pen if this went beyond the walls of Morton Insurance. The sound of the elevator's grinding cables helped Ruth calm down. She almost laughed at such a minor distraction taking her mind off what had just happened to her, but she let the annoyance linger. Why couldn't a place like this afford a proper elevator bank? Who in their right mind makes a place with 25 floors and only has 3 elevators without so much as a single innovation from the villain cities? Why didn't she bring someone who could keep her safe? Had he done this to other agents before? What was taking that goddamn elevator so long? The elevator was mercifully empty when it finally arrived. She leaned against a wall, determining something to learn from the incident. Her mind was uncharacteristically scattered, so she reached for her pen. It wasn't there, so she grabbed the backup and began to write a few notes. Ruth was frustrated with her jittery handwriting, but it was serviceable. She took a note to bring an anti-psychic the next time she had business with the SSPI, and to always bring the hero in question for future meetings. She almost didn't notice the elevator opening, and the concerned face of Lindsay staring her down. Miss Justine, I must apologize on behalf of the Society of Superpowered Individuals. Mr. Dixon has informed us of the incident, and we will be taking appropriate actions, but... Ruth held up a hand. That won't be necessary. Mr. Dixon was aggravated and had a momentary lapse of judgment. So long as he complies with a few basic requests, I'll be content to leave this as an unofficial arrangement. I'll not be a victim, and I'll not deprive the community of a volunteer. She took a determined stride, forcing Lindsay to hurry beside her as she walked towards the museum floor. Please, Miss Justine, allow us to offer you something for your troubles. Anything. Ruth sighed and said, Fine, free admittance to the museum. Will that satisfy you if I accept that? Lindsay nodded, reaching into her pocket and offering Ruth a gold-lined card. It was a premium membership to the Society of Superpowered Individuals Museum of the Heroic. Lovely. Thank you for your hospitality, Lindsay. I'll be taking my leave now. Mr. Dixon can expect to hear back from me in a few days. Ruth shook Lindsay's hand, offered her her business card, and left the museum. A week later, Ruth had framed a copy of her premium membership and hung it next to her calendar. She'd taken a liking to it after a few days, her own triumph of the professional over the emotional. It also helped that Mr. Dixon had caved to all of her demands rather quickly. Ruth suspected he'd become a favorite point of contact within the SSPI once she'd found a good anti-esper to accompany her. She'd also received letters from Sweet Rose and Rodeo King thanking her for her time and confirming they'd received their respective dues. Ruth almost felt something, a tinge of pride in the hero's choice not just to help her colleague, but writing Ruth back. She cut the thought off, reminding herself that it was professionalism that had gotten her clients their closure, not a bleeding heart. The office door opened, steel striker entering her office. She feigned a smile and extended a hand. Mr. Brent, a pleasure to see you again. Ready to try the good intent defense this time? Your ears are appreciated. I appreciate you listening, and as the sole voice and writer of this podcast, that might mean something. And for my editors, Tom and Michaela, I appreciate your help so much. You make this silly project work. This is another of the short stories meant to supplement Daniel Ward's sometimes narrow perspective on the world of superclaims, but don't always expect these to be within the halls of modern insurance. Do expect more superhero perspectives and regular citizen lives in a corporate hero-dominated world, though. If you've been supporting my podcast at patreon.com/mordeninsurance, MORDEN insurance, then this is old news. You heard this podcast 3 months early, or read it 3 months early if your mental reading voice is the preferred voice. If you'd like early access to these or future short stories, go to patreon.com/mordeninsurance and pledge $2 for texts of upcoming short stories and episodes, or $5 for early audio of short stories and my eternal gratitude. Thanks for listening. See you next time.